This is the Self-Taught or Not podcast with
Dylan Israel
and Erik, where we teach you the do's and don'ts of software development from two software development professionals, one self-taught and one not.
Today, what we're talking about is Erik's sort of origin story, where he his sort of how he got into coding. Because I think one thing that's really important when it comes to being a developer is understanding that, and really just in life, is your career plays a large part of your life, and everyone's path is different.
I think we're going to see a lot of similarities between Dylan's story and mine in the way that we had some struggles in between both of our stories. We both had to work really hard to get where we are, and we're both privileged in some ways. We had some advantages, but we also had a lot of disadvantages too.
Yeah. So why don't you give us the sort of the birth, the child scene? Like, 'cause sometimes people think when you come out the womb, you're out here hacking out. Probably at that time, people were doing like Visual Basic. But why don't you give us our sort of the ground zero of Erik?
Yeah. So I'm from Reno, Nevada. I've been born and raised. It's funny when I tell people that I was born in Reno, people are like, Reno, Nevada? Like, were you born in a casino? I'm like, no, I was born in Reno, Nevada, just like Las Vegas. We live there. A lot of people come from out of town to Reno. It's sort of known as more of a gaming, gambling town, but there's a lot to offer here, and it's really close to Lake Tahoe. So I was really into video games. I got into Prodigy really young. I got into online really young. I'm a little bit older than Dylan, so I think our story started I started a little earlier off on my technology journey, but it was really fun. Especially, I remember my dad bringing home like 286s and 386s, and I got to work on those. I used to play just tons of video games. I played like Sierra Online, if anybody remembers that. It was like this online gaming system out there. It was pretty crazy. I even got into some BBS's bulletin board systems as well.
Yeah, I think it's sort of funny because like a lot of, honestly, God, I haven't met a single dev that doesn't play video games at some point in their life. And so like in that aspect, we definitely have something in common. And one sort of cool note I think I liked on here, and this is not that relevant, but you were a big Quake player and tried to join a Quake clan, but didn't quite work out.
Yeah. So I remember this started happening in high school. I was just really into going out online and going to bulletin board systems. This was the time where you couldn't easily jump online and play Quake against other people. Dial-up modems. So the internet's not like what it is today with this really low ping speed. So I had tried to join a Quake clan. I remember fighting against this other person and I had lost, but it was just kind of that kind of mentality back then, where we call ourselves high ping bastards because we just on these dial-up modems and we were just doing gaming that way. And it was just a different time. Actually, most of the gaming I did with Quake was in together. We would have these net nights. Me and my buddies all got together. We would throw all our computers, network them all together, and then just do a night of gaming, which was really fun. And there would be like local clans that would come to town, and we would all get together and have these little skirmishes. It was pretty cool.
Yeah, and so it looked from what I remember, I was talking, your first sort of introduction to programming, your first programming class was in college. But how did you, as someone who went to college, did you always knew you wanted to be a programmer? How did that sort of path present itself?
Well, I mean, when I was really young, I wanted to be a scientist, and then I realized like I wanted to get like that beaker set in like mixed stuff together, and I never got it. And then later on, I wanted to become a pilot. My dad was actually more in the Air Force Air Guard, really, and he worked with a lot of pilots, and I really wanted to be a pilot. But sooner or later, I realized I had just this passion for technology and programming, and it kind of started off with video games and seeing all the cool stuff you could do there. And I think my first class, like in high school, my first introduction to programming was this QBasic class as a freshman in my high school. And this was like in the mid 90s. A very easy class, but it kind of realized like I can input these elements in here, put a go to, a for loop, and then I can make this really cool I think I created like the snow picture, like it was like a Christmas theme, and play music. And I was like, wow, this is really neat.
So go-tos. Would you actually, because I'm going to guess a lot of aspiring developers don't even know what a go-to is because they've never probably would you give a quick description of a go-to statement for people?
Yeah. So basic, the programming language basic, and there's a few variants of it, would have this go to command. And it meant, rather than what we think of modern programming languages, where you have functional programming and you have different functions, and you call different functions or methods. In a lot of basics, you could like go to, and you have these line numbers in your app, in your program, and then each line number will correspond to a different piece of code. So you would literally be like, okay, I want to go to this piece of code that's later on in the file, and in line 1432. So you put go to 1432, and then it would go down to that piece of code, and then it would either return back or just continue on. And if you've heard the term spaghetti code, this is pretty much what happened with basic
Yeah.
programs. It really became really easy to create this terrible spaghetti code. And of course, basic has subroutines too, which are sort of like functions, but it was really became easy to create pretty terrible code really quickly.
It was a dark time. It was a dark.
Yep.
So you're in school and you're, you couple, I shouldn't say a couple years later, but you're grinding away at college and you graduate. And so what sort of happens next? Excuse me, graduating from high school, and you're going to college, and what starts? How is your career progressing? How are you, going from aspiring developer to making sure that you're a very quickly hired developer?
So I had definitely the taste of development and programming from that Qt Basic class in high school, and I did a little bit of HTML and CSS. But I came out of high school and I was like, I really wanted to be a developer. This was like right near the .com bust, kind of .com right at the end in the early 2000s. I went to school and I dropped out of school because I thought, well, I can just go get a job. I'm in Nevada. I'm pretty close to California. I could just get a job in California and make tons of money. And what I did is I did 2 semesters of college, dropped out. I got terrible, okay grades, but not great, because I was spending most of my time just playing video games and reading up on tech. And then the .com bust hit. I couldn't find the jobs that I could get before in California. So I just ended up taking a tech support job inside the local tech company in town. And one thing I remember, I had moved out of my parents' house. I'm like 20 years old. I'm in this really crappy apartment. I have no money. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. I have a $500 credit card that I got from my bank that's continuously maxed out. And I'm like, is this what my life's going to be? Like, I didn't take, right after high school, I didn't take like a year off traveling or anything. I just moved out and dropped out of college and then just started living. And I just realized, wow, my situation isn't great.
Yeah, I don't want to turn this talk into like a money talk or like anything like that, but I can definitely sort of attest to the like sort of hitting that rock bottom financially and the stress of living paycheck to paycheck. And it always amazes me that like I have family members and friends who have been doing this for 30 years, living paycheck to paycheck, and that level of stress either doesn't affect them or they just don't care. I haven't quite yet figured it out. But it's a rough thing when you're sort of stuck in that cycle. So you drop out of college, right? And it's not, not going as smooth. A lot of people think, oh, you're going to graduate in 4 years. I don't know anyone who's graduated in 4 years. But so you got to do that. And you start working in tech support, which is like, a common question I get a lot is, hey, should I take this tech support job and, try to work my way up?
It was, at the time, it was a job, and it felt like it was closer to being a programmer than just doing nothing or working at 7-Eleven. I mean, at this time too, I went through like a bad breakup with a girlfriend that had been dating since high school. And I just started being on like EverQuest and WoW and all those MMOs 8 hours a day. started hanging out like at arcades. It felt sort of like a loser a little bit. Definitely felt like it wasn't the best time of my life. But one thing I'm proud of is didn't I kept going with my dream. My dream is to become a developer and programmer. So I'm like, if I can get this tech support, I knew that same company hired developers. They usually only hired people with college degrees. But I knew if I at least could get my foot in the door, I thought maybe one day I can become a developer at that company.
A lot of people, we're talking about like 2001 to 2004, 2005. There weren't as many resources back then to try and teach yourself. Nowadays you say, hey, just buy a Udemy course, go on YouTube, 15 years later. But learning to become a software engineer with, open source resources wasn't really something that completely existed back then.
No, I mean, this is the day. I don't think Stack Overflow didn't exist. There was no free code camp. YouTube had just started in 2004, I think, and really no one was making YouTube tutorials. Yeah, you were pretty much going to your local library, grabbing books, going to your community colleges, learning to program that way, or if you knew someone that could tutor you, but that was rare. So it was really difficult back then to get in, and most companies aren't as open as they are now. Almost unless you wanted to get a job at maybe a small web development company that were just looking to hire people at $7 an hour, no one was hiring developers without college degrees either.
So you're working tech support for a couple of years, and you've been out of college for about 3-4 years, and you decide to go back. What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, I was working at that tech support job, and I kind of got a few promotions, and then I was doing like tech support lead, and then I got demoted off the tech support lead back to just taking regular phone calls. And it wasn't anything I had done to get demoted. It was like mismanagement, and they were changing things around. So, back to the situation I was in, I was like, there's got to be something better. I'm making no money. I'm living paycheck to paycheck. Maybe college is the right way for me. And I think at the time, and that's one of the reasons why I'm pro college, is that it really did help me out a lot. One nice thing too is, since I was working at this job, they had this tuition reimbursement program that would help pay for a lot of it. So I took them up on their offer. I decided to only work 15 to 20 hours a week, which is still a lot while you're going to college, and then just focus my full-time effort on college. And so I started taking programming classes. You have to take a bunch of normal classes, kind of core curriculum classes that everybody has to take. So I just pretty much, my day was get up in the morning, I take like 2 or 3 classes during the day, roll into work about 1 or 2 o'clock, work from 2 to 6 or 7. And I just did that every day.
So while you're there, you're doing all your classes, you meet the love of your life, and end up getting married right after graduation, and then post-college happens, right?
Yeah. So I got married. So I was still in that same tech support job. So all 4 years of college, I was doing the same exact tech support job. And I was at that point, I was like, I'm done with this. Like, I'm not, like, I had gotten a few raises, and I think it was like $16 an hour or something. Which is not bad, but it was like, this is not what I want to do. So I had finagled my way by talking to the development manager if I could work as a developer for them as an intern. So I had moved into that internship position right before I graduated. And then I had worked there as an intern for probably 6 months. And then they didn't hire me. So it was kind of a blow. I was like one of these jobs that I had been at that point for 6 or 7, maybe 5, 6, 7 years. And I thought this was my forever job, being very naive at the time, and that I was just going to become a developer. And yeah, they didn't hire me. And part of it was because I really probably didn't work hard enough. They had a really advanced Java code base that I wasn't familiar with, and I didn't put the time in. So, I just kind of took it on the chin, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to just start applying everywhere.
And so you did, and you got a referral to your first real interview. And like many of us, it didn't go very well.
Yeah, so I was hyped. Like, I was transitioning out of my internship, and I was like, I need to get a job. I'm just getting married. I just got married, and I went to this place called GE, which is General Electric, but they have an office probably about an hour away, which would have been a terrible commute. But I'm like, this is a real tech company. They pay tech company wages, and this would be perfect for me. So I did an all-day interview, and if you've ever been in an all-day tech interview, it's exhausting. I remember halfway through the day, it was like noon. I had just done like 2 whiteboarding interviews, which I think I did okay on, but I messed up on a few things. And they took me out to lunch at Subway, and I'm sitting in Subway in the middle of the interview, and everybody's talking around me, but no one's talking to me. And I realized right there, I'm like, this interview's over. And lo and behold, I didn't get the job. And it was just kind of I just kind of had a learning lesson after that. Is like, wow, if I want to get one of these jobs as a developer, I need to work my butt off. I need to spend 8 hours a day just studying algorithms, studying all the basics that I've learned the last 4 years, because they were asking me questions for my degree. They're asking me like operating systems questions that I hadn't even looked at in a while. I just realized like I need to prepare more for my next job.
Yeah, so your wife, that happens, and I'm sure there's some successes and some failures as interviewing. Usually interviews aren't a one and done sort of thing, right? You got to keep trying, especially I think in development. People who don't work as developers and don't know what the interview process, it's a grueling process, every single one, it feels like. But you keep moving forward, and your wife hooks you up with a job in development at her work, is it?
Right. Yeah. So I was spending like 8 hours a day. Once now I am married, but the internship was over, don't have a job. And I start practicing these algorithms every day. And then my wife's like, well, why don't you just work for us? My boss is looking for a programmer for this home automation company. And we deal with these devices that help control the lights, the HVAC, and your home the entertainment systems. And the programming is kind of like this C type syntax. It's almost like, it's also visual too. You have to kind of move stuff over, and there might be a little bit of web development. Yeah, so I jumped on it, and that was my first real programming job. I wish I had a better story that I worked thousands of hours like Dylan and applied to thousands of places, but it was just happened to be I knew someone that worked there, and she was able to get me the job.
Yo, when I was looking for a job, I would have wifed somebody up too if they they got me my first job. But yeah, so you're working at this first job for a while, and you're doing web dev on the side. Things don't, some unfortunate news happens, as is life.
Yeah. I think if you listen to our layoff episode, I mentioned a few times where I've been laid off, and this was one of them. So I had worked there for 2 years right out of college. And one day my boss actually pulled my wife aside, didn't even tell me first, and told my wife that I was laid off. And then my wife came home crying and told me I was laid off. And that was pretty hard. I was like, and I realized though, it wasn't quite the right path for me at that job. All looking back, they didn't really pay that much they paid okay, but it wasn't as much as I definitely am worth. Few months later, my wife got laid off when she was right after we had our first kid together. So once again, like, I have no job. Now I'm married and I have a kid, and we both get laid off within like months of each other. And this is, late 2000s, where the housing crisis is at the highest. Nobody's hiring in Reno where I live. And I was like, dang, man, this is tough times.
Yeah, it's not a good time to be. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie The Big Short or anything like that, that's the period of time we're talking about, where mortgages are, going up and under, and people are losing jobs, and it's a tight labor market, to say the least. And you move on to your second job, which isn't in development necessarily.
Yeah, so I had spent 2 months maybe putting out resumes. I mean, we thought about moving to San Francisco. We thought about moving to Boulder. We thought about getting out of Reno, but we had family there. We just had a baby. It was just like really tough. We had a lot of good friends. So I just kept applying for different places, and I found a QA job doing quality assurance, which is not what I wanted to do. But when you got to pay the bills, you got to pay the bills. So I took the job, and I just worked my butt off. I was just trying to, when I got in there, I was like, I'll work everybody here. I understand development really well. I can automate things. So I spent most of my days, they had this big Excel spreadsheet of manual test cases. So I was like the whole day I was trying to figure out like, how can we do this better? How can I do this faster? Can we put this in some sort of system to automate it? I even worked with a team to help try to automate some of the testing that we did. And we made some progress, which was good. Then I just spent 3 years, well, 2.5 years there, just working in QA. And at the same time, they had a development department. So I would just go over to the development manager. He used to work at NASA, and he was just this really brilliant guy. And I'd be like, hey, I'm really love to work for you guys. And he's like, well, tell me about your experience. And I tell him I'd have a CS degree and I was working QA. And he would just be like, okay, well, next time we have a job opening, apply. And then I would apply and then I wouldn't get the job. And that went on for 2.5 years. I think I was there for 3 months before I started trying to apply for different departments.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think a lot of people are like, "Hey, should I take this QA job to go into dev?" It's like you can take that path, and it's not a bad one, but don't think it's sort of going to be overnight, because it's companies, once they sort of have you in the role that they have you in, they oftentimes want to keep you in that role a lot of times.
Yeah, especially if you're good at it. I mean, fortunately, yeah, you don't the opportunities aren't quite as there. And this was a little bit of a bigger organization. Having those, looking back now and having those 2.5-3 years in QA, I have so much more respect for everybody I work with who works in QA now, because I've been there. I've been having to deal with crappy code that doesn't work. Like we literally had in our dev department I was working with, they would throw over code that wouldn't even compile, that wouldn't even work. We had to do a sanity checklist to make sure once we got new releases to make sure the basic functionality worked, because half the time it would be broken. So I got a really good respect for QA. But to move the story along, I was able to, I found a different person. Her name was Janie. She gave me a big chance with me and said, if you want to come over, work with Java and work with us, we'll give you a shot. I've seen you. And she even joked that I saw you've applied for, I think she said 12 times in the 3 years I was there. And she said, like, if this doesn't work, then, we're not going to let you be here, but you'll probably lose your job. But if this does work, you can stay. And so, as soon as I got the job, I got no raise in pay. I was still making QA wages, which unfortunately the industry that we're in, QA wages are usually a lot less than developer wages. It's a good chunk less. But I'm like, I won't even take a pay raise or anything. I'll just work. And so I just started. And I remember my first programming assignment was to write this report. And I had to write like this probably like a 200-line trans SQL statement. I knew some SQL, but I didn't know it that well. And I just spent like 3 weeks writing this huge transact SQL statement, integrating it with a Java report system and getting it all working. And when I got it done, I was like, okay, I made the right choice. And I worked like tons of late hours. I know that once later in your career, I think you focus more on your family, but I think earlier in your career, you got to put in those extra hours.
You definitely want to ramp up. Now, I want to touch on something that, because I'm money hungry, and I think a lot of people are, and part of the reason they get in development. But you said you didn't take any pay increase, but so you were at this job about 8 years, so you're here for another 5.5 years. How did you? At what point do you say, "Hey, maybe my wages should go up"? And how did you sort of negotiate that or bring that topic up once you felt like, okay, cool, I'm doing a good job, I'm not going to lose it, let's have a conversation? Or did you even?
In hindsight, I probably should have had that conversation. But what I did is I just believed in my management team, the managers I worked with, and I just thought that if I worked hard, that they would recognize me. And it came out to be a good story. They did. So I think the first year I may have gotten the minimum raise, but like the second or third year, I got some really big bumps. So I got like 10% increases, 15% increases, which are pretty high. Some industries have that every year. I think a lot of companies don't. You're sometimes lucky to get the 2 or 3% raise. So I got some really big raises, and that pretty much put me on equal footing as the other developers when I left. And I went from senior. I think I went from like developer 1 to, they have these developer steps. They had developer 1, developer 2, developer 3. And so throughout all, I think I made up 3 or 4 steps.
If I ever run a dev shop, I'm not going to do like 1, 2, or 3. I'm going to do like Dragon Ball Z characters where you start off at like Krillin and eventually become Goku. Like that's going to
And then
be it.
Super Saiyan.
Yeah.
Is that like a fellow?
Yeah, then you'll get to Super Saiyan, Super Saiyan 2, Super Saiyan 3. We're not going to do Super Saiyan 4. You'll do Super Saiyan God and God Super Saiyan Blue. I don't know. And then Ultra Instinct. And at that point, we have to fire you because you cost too much money.
I hear that in some organizations, like titles don't mean anything, and people they just make up titles. But the problem I don't like about that is if there's not a stepping stone between different titles that have different pay bumps and pay levels. Because if you just make up, if you're in a startup and you're like, I'm super ninja developer, how are you going to be like, hey, can I get a raise to super ninja developer 2? Or you just have to hope that they do? I don't know.
Yeah, so my thought on this is it's a sort of twofold. Is you should always know what the next step in your career at a company is, and if you don't, guess what? There isn't one. So keep that in mind, and you have to accept that fact or move on. And 2, some companies have really wonky titles, and one thing that I've done on my resume is I simply give a title that's relevant, right? So like my first title ever was web engineer. What I was basically was a full stack dev. And so I just put full stack engineer on there. And
that's a good one.
Don't go, and if you're tech support, don't go and put full stack engineer, right? But if it's relevant, because maybe a software engineer 1 at your company is a senior dev, but other people may not know, or web dev 1 or web dev 2, just put senior software engineer. You're not lying, you're sort of more so clarifying. And I do that because I've made that mistake, and I've had recruiters tell me, well, what the hell does this mean, basically? You're there for a couple of years and you decide that you do anything for 8 years, shit gets repetitive, right? And you're saying, I need a little bit more of a challenge, and on to the next endeavor.
Right. And I think if you've been in any place for more than 4 or 5 years,
months,
especially in tech, months it feels, nowadays it's months. But yeah, it's really hard to keep learning and keep things fresh and new, and when you've been at a job for that long. So I decided that, my first real challenge is, hey, once again, tuition reimbursement through my company. That's a running theme through my story. I'm like, I can go back to school again. Do I want to get a master's in CS, or do I want to do something else? And I looked at the master's, and the classes were in the middle of the day. Like they didn't cater towards working adults. So I literally would have had to finagle with my boss to like come in at noon on some days and 1 on other days, and maybe work the weekend. And that sounded pretty horrible. I might have been able to pull it off because my boss was really supportive. But instead, I looked at it. I had a friend that was in the MBA program. So I went back to school and got my MBA, which we could do a whole podcast on developers who get MBAs. I actually knew quite a few, and I think we all have different ideas of that. But it was just a great experience. I got to meet some really cool people. And what kind of really I like, one of my highlight classes, I took a personal branding class, which kind of sounds funny in the MBA world, but it was kind of like a way to teach MBA students how to get your name online. And so like how to create a Twitter account and how to create a blog and how to create a YouTube channel. And then they actually made you post to your blog every week 2 or 3 times, and also post to social media. And then a couple of assignments had you create YouTube videos. So it was like a crash course on how to become a YouTuber and how to become how to create a brand. So, and we had a whole episode on branding, I believe. So if you guys want to listen to that.
I was gonna say that it's interesting that, do you know what the number one job that millennials want to have is? To be an influencer. That's our entire generation wants to just be YouTubers and show their butts on Instagram. But yeah, but this did have a profound effect on your career and your life, right? So you have the YouTube channel, and you start a couple other side projects.
Yeah, I think me and Dylan both could be considered influencers. and I don't really like that word because I think people use it in a negative connotation now. Like if you have any sort of online presence,
Yeah,
then
almost
you're
like we're peer pressuring the world. Like
like influencing people, like it's some nefarious thing. Like, no, we're just two guys have built a little bit of a following on YouTube and podcasts and stuff, and we teach people things. Where were we? Anyways, so the
we were talking about some of your. I was trying to get you to talk about some side projects.
yeah, so I same time, like the same time period, I was still working this job. I went back doing my MBA. I just did a ton of little things, you know. I think this really helped my career and really helped me kind of propel it forward. I went to hackathons, my local hackathons that they had. I created a program called Be By You, which was like how to find coworkers. We created this little bit of an app that you can connect to other coworkers, or not coworkers, just anybody that signed in. You can like kind of track their location and see when they're nearby. It was kind of a fun little app. We did something called Remind Memo. I worked with another guy on that for 6 months. I had never worked in WordPress in my whole life. And I just like, I'm going to learn WordPress. I'm going to learn how to create plugins. So I spent like 6 months creating this plugin that you can use to pop into a WordPress site to send appointment reminders. Like if you're, let's say you're a dentist and you need to contact all your patients, you would, for an appointment that they're going to have, you would use this little app I created. And then I went to like hackathons. I went to even more hackathons. Reno had a hackathon where you helped create an iOS. We created like a little iOS app. I've never done iOS before. And I just kind of tinkered it and put together this iOS app. Now, I don't always recommend going to hackathons and picking up a technology you don't know. I actually didn't win many of these hackathons. It was more of a learning experience to me. But I did on my second hackathon, Reno hackathon I went to, we created, I think we called it Property Monster. It was like it took the public data from all the Reno assessor sites where you can find where everyone lives and how much their houses are, and we put it in the searchable database, which was really fun. Yeah, so I just spent a lot of time doing things like that. I even was contacted while I was doing the personal branding class to do a book. And so I created my first book called the Ember.js Cookbook. And if you go back to our How to Write a Technical Book podcast, you can learn all about how I did that.
Yeah, so obviously quite a few side projects, and I'm sure we could sit here and do a it's so funny. We did a side project episode, and I think it was our shortest episode, but like, we were prepped enough. But yeah, so you get your MBA, you get into the value of influencing and personal projects. Due to the book deal, due to getting your name out there, and due to just the industry, you get a couple of recruiters that snipe you away to your current job.
Right. I think everything I did when I was working that job, I was working 8 hours a day doing development there, and then spending I don't know, 1 to 3 hours every night, either writing this book, going on YouTube, preparing for a hackathon. I even did some freelancing. So I just spent my time, this starts building up. Like, not all these things it just kind of helped me propel me into being recognized. And I started getting lots and lots of recruiters contacting me. And I had all these job opportunities. I got flown to Mountain View. I applied for Google. I didn't get it, but I was flown to Mountain View and stayed overnight there. I was flown to Boston, New York. Like, I was doing all these interviews, meeting all these people. And it was really because just putting myself out there and doing all these side projects. The second job, the job I had, I was definitely feeling like I needed to move on. I've been there so long. I decided that there were some aspects I really liked. Like, I really liked the people there. I did some traveling. I traveled all over the U.S. I really liked that part, but I wasn't learning. Like, I wasn't being challenged enough. So I had just kept applying, not really trying to apply. I would just, every time a recruiter would email me for the last 2 years at my previous job, I'd be like, okay, well, what's this? I would just get the info on it. And if they really liked me, I would do the phone interview, but I never like reached out to anybody. I just waited for people to reach out to me. And some of them, I almost took a few offers. A lot of them I got rejected on, but it gave me a lot of experience of also getting back out there and interviewing.
Yeah, it's a good position to be in. So we're caught up to present day, and I think we've dove into the journey a little bit through this episode. Any sort of final thoughts that you want to touch on?
Yeah. Well, just to end the thread there, I did get the job I am at now that I've been at for a couple of years now. It's called Cerity. It's an awesome company, and they really treat me right. It's we do insurance, workers' compensation insurance, and I'm being challenged every day. It's a lot of really fun stuff. And one thing is, I think me and Dylan's story isn't over yet. We're still doing tons of things. We're doing this podcast. We both have membership courses. I'm trying to look at some new projects I want to start next year. So I think, if you can learn anything from my story, is that really what really propelled me and really took me off is just having that willingness to just put a lot of effort in and then just take chances. Like, it was a huge chance to take that MBA course. Like, I didn't know it was a ton of time. Took me over 3 years to do it, but it like paid back in so many dividends and so many things. And YouTube was a big thing too. It was like putting yourself out there, but it's paid back multiple times. So I would say if you learn anything from this podcast episode, is just that, putting yourself out there and just trying a bunch of different things is well worth it.
Yeah, I think that the one thing you can tell from both of our sort of stories is that consistent level of effort outside of work, even if it's just an hour a day, can help propel your career and your finances and your life for that matter. And from all these projects, from going back to school and writing books, and you can see the dividends nowadays.
Also, I think we can both say too, I'm married, I have 2 kids, and just having that support from my wife and my kids, it makes things so much easier too in life. And I think you could say the same thing, Dylan, with your girlfriend. And
Oh yeah, man. I've talked about this before, where April and I have been almost 10 years now, and there was a point where we broke up, and I remember feeling like such a loser, like because I didn't have my dev job and I was studying, I didn't have it yet, and I was like at that cracking point. And I called her and we were broken up. She had no reason. She came over and it's like, "Well, are you trying?" And it's like, "Yeah." And she's like, "You're gonna do it." And that was all I needed to hear. Like, that was it. And then like 6-8 weeks later, I got my first dev job.
yeah, it just keep going out there and keep trying, and I think it'll all work out for you. And I think both of us have a lot more to write in the story. We'll see. Maybe we'll do a if we're still doing this podcast in 2 years, maybe we'll have a update for everyone.
Yeah. The moral of the story, as my girlfriend would summarize it, is basically the women held us down and they did it all. All right, we'll leave it on that. Hey guys, thanks for watching. If you want to find more about what I'm up to, go to dylanisrael.com.
And if you want to know what I'm up to, you can check out my website at erik.video. If you haven't already, please leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. It really helps us out. And if you do, you might even be featured on our next episode. Don't forget to check out the website at selftaughtornot.com. From there, you can sign up for a mailing list where we give away free courses and a bunch of cool stuff. And we'll also let you know when the next episode comes out. And finally, if you didn't know, we have a Facebook group. It's called Code, Tech, and Caffeine. We have over 10,000 members, and you can find the link at selftaughtornot.com. So come join us. We have tons of developers willing to help you guys, mentor you guys. Check it out. Just make sure you go to selftaughtornot.com and check out the Code, Tech, and Caffeine link. Thanks, and take care.